direct contact with the floor. And if the floor is basically concrete, the peak force back up onto your body that we can exert onto the barbell will be right here, which is what we want. However, this peak force right here is something that we want to avoid if we are at work and we work on concrete all day. What's going on, everybody? Hey, it's Hopper. We got another video coming at you once again with Brutus, Ultimate Warrior. Gang's all here. Let's get started. The topic for this video will be footwear. This video could be probably 20 to 30 minutes depending on how we discuss this topic. With respect to deadlifting, deadlifting is a common activity that people do. I actually have a video about it right here. And there are numerous conversations and topics with respect to footwear and deadlifting that we will discuss. We will also discuss what type of footwear that we should wear when we're out in our daily environments, depending on what we do for work. The first thing that we need to cover on the whiteboard here is the concept of impulse, which is force multiplied by time. And the graph looks like this. Time will be the independent variable. If I could turn back time. And then we have force. So time and then force is going to be the dependent variable. Impulse is equal to force multiplied by time. And this equation will be critical depending on what we do with our daily lifestyle. If we work on concrete all day, or if we decide to go deadlift, or if we run on a track, and this is what it looks like. So if we have, we'll go 4 seconds here, go 0, and if we have a certain amount of newtons of force, we'll just say that the curve looks like this. And then if we have another amount of force that looks like this, for the sake of argument, let's assume that the amount of newtons of force is the same here as it is for this triangle. However, if we only have, we'll call it 1.5 seconds right here on the chart, we can see that we have a higher peak force here versus if we spread the force out over time. This is actually how football helmets work, or if we land on a crash pad.
I think the headbangers are going to wish they'd went on back to the oh my God, about it.
If we have a peak force here, if we need to metaphorically and literally soften the blow of something, we want to take the amount of force and we want to spread it out over a longer period of time. And this is the difference between if we were to run on a track versus if we were to run on concrete. If we run on a track versus if we run on sand. So this chart right here is critical with respect to our footwear. The first style of shoe that we will discuss are the Chuck Taylors, the Converse All-Star Chuck Taylors. They've been around forever. I often see people deadlifting in those. That's a good shoe to deadlift in for one reason, the fact that it has a flat heel. And the flat heel, I'll just erase this right here. The flat heel will help us stay in the heel a bit more and load the proximal end of the hamstring that originates on the ischial tuberosity right through here. However, the one thing that I'm not a big fan of with respect to the flat heel is this actual rubber part of the sole will minimize the peak force. Because that rubber heel, it'll take that force and it'll, let's just say if we were to deadlift barefoot and the peak force that we generate onto the floor is here, it would take that force and kind of round it out and down to here. We need to understand that forces occur in pairs. Forces are equal and opposite. So if we have force right here equals pairs. And the ground reaction force back up onto us, if we have an extremely soft shoe, well, Chuck Taylor really isn't extremely soft, but it's rubbery. If we have this softer shoe, then that spreads the peak force back up onto our body throughout a longer period of time. That will hinder actually the bone density that we could eventually generate, because we want to, with the idea of deadlifting, we want to have as high of peak forces as we can. We never want to diminish that peak force when we look to lift weights or utilize a drill to generate explosive strength. The next type of shoe that I subscribe to would be the Adidas weightlifting shoe that we can also do plyometric drills in. It's not specifically just a weightlifting shoe, it's a bit of a hybrid. And that heel has a little bit of a wedge to it like this. I believe it's a 0.7 inch heel. And what this does is this heel will give the gastroc, the calf, and the soleus a little bit more slack. And it allows us to create more ankle flexion at the ankle. So if we were to squat down just on a floor where we don't have a wedge like that, if this is the tib fib complex and this part of my forearm right here is the foot, then let's say if we flex like this, but if we were to elevate the heel, we would have more slack in the gastrocnemius and in the soleus, and we could flex and have more of an acute angle. And that will actually help to receive a barbell on a clean. We would be more upright. However, this wedge makes the lift a little bit more quad dominant, and that's certainly not a bad thing. It just depends on what the objective is with respect to the weightlifting. So this wedge right here on the Adidas shoes will arguably have a harder structure than the rubber sole of those Chuck Taylors. However, it will put us at more of that flexed ankle position, which, depending on what the goal is, again, that can be useful and it can be detrimental. Neither one of these are wrong. They both have their merits. I would prefer the Adidas wedge shoe over the Chuck Taylors, simply because we're gonna have a higher peak force, regardless of the fact that the lift would be a little bit more quad dominant. Another option would be to lift barefoot. If we lift barefoot and we are on a flat surface, if we have the femur right here, the kneecap, and then if we have the tib fib complex with the foot, there is no shoe, and we literally have direct contact with the floor. And if the floor is basically concrete, the peak force back up onto your body that we can exert onto the barbell will be right here, which is what we want. However, this peak force right here is something that we want to avoid if we are at work and we work on concrete all day. What we would then want is a softer shoe, like a running shoe, maybe even take an insert and put the insert into the running shoe. And we want to spread the peak force out throughout that 4 second, that 5 seconds, so that way the force back up onto our body is much smaller. The forces back up onto our body that are spread out over a longer period of time will make our body feel significantly better. The spine, the way it sits, all the intervertebral discs, that'll feel so much better throughout the spine, because we're basically fighting gravity throughout the entire day. So we need to transition back and forth based off of what our objective is. If we work all day and we're out and we do construction, if we wear work boots, I would strongly suggest to buy an insert, put an insert into the work boot, so that way it spreads the peak forces out throughout a longer period of time. However, when you go to the gym, then we need to either do barefoot, have a weightlifting shoe that has a harder surface. That way we can take advantage of the higher peak forces in through here. The higher peak forces will help with the bone density, which gets into Wolff's Law. And the bone density will start to occur when those muscles pull on those bones. That's a little bit of a topic for another time, but the idea of generating bone density and acquiring general overall health, this idea of Wolff's Law definitely needs to be accounted for. So that concludes this video in particular. This is a brief discussion of footwear and what we need to be focused on when we pursue our daily lifestyle, whether if we work in a certain environment or if we go and lift or if we go and run on a certain pavement. We can certainly spend some more time on this on another video, but this is a good introduction to it. So for those of you that have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Please like this video and subscribe for more content. For those of you that wish to donate, visit the links below in the description. Share this information on other social media platforms. Wow. And we will see you all next time. No high five. Damn.